And that first time you tried Uber was magic. And you push a button on your phone and like a car showed up.
Yes.
And now we don't think about how magical that was. When you have the best idea, you find the best idea you've ever seen and you've ever been involved in. You go all the way as fast as you can go.
You had such a compressed window and skeptics all around and cynics all around. How do you do it?
But I was very deliberate. I make deals that should happen when they wouldn't otherwise happen. I make them happen faster, and I make deals that shouldn't happen and not happen faster.
The moment you have misalignment of incentives, blows up, right? So you need perfect alignment from LPs to VCs to founders to execs to employees to customers. Like you need back and forth.
I'd like to have built something that's more important than Uber, because Uber is very important to the world. Satisfaction you get out of building something that changes the world for the good. Right? You stop drunk driving, it's easier to have jobs, to live in the suburbs. So many benefits of that. To build something as important like that in the next phase of my career would be something that I'm aiming at.
Hello, everyone. Today, we have a very, very special guest. This is somebody we've been excited to have on our show for a very long time. Needs no introduction, but I prepared an intro because I did not want to mess this one up. He's a very special friend of ours. Emil Michael is an investor and strategic advisor to many high-growth startups. He was a chief business officer at Uber during its period of exponential growth. He was responsible for a bunch of it, and at some point it was considered the most valuable startup in the world. He's held leadership positions at Tellme Networks, which was acquired by Microsoft, at Clout. He also worked at the Office of the Secretary of Defense under the Obama administration. Today, he advises founders on fundraising, M&A, corporate strategy, culture, global expansion, and building out their exec teams, all topics that our listeners, our audiences really deeply care about. He was born in Egypt, and he has degrees from both Harvard and Stanford. To us, Emil is the embodiment of the American dream. We often talk about how outsiders can make it to being insiders. It's one of the core themes of our show. And to us, Emil, you are truly the embodiment of that. So we're so awesomely fortunate to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be on your show. You guys are becoming celebrities around the world, so I'm getting a little piece of that today on your podcast. So thanks for having me.
Oh gosh, come on! Like that intro Aarthi did does not begin to do justice to everything you accomplished. Okay, so we're going to start you off easy, right, with a softball question. So suffice it to say, right, like you're incredibly accomplished, but a lot of people in the last few years would have known you for your time at Uber. And if folks are not familiar with Uber or ML or the times happened there, go Google. There's a lot of fun stuff which happened. But here's a softball question to start you off. If you could go back in time and have a do-over of all of your time at Uber, starting from the very first moment you opened the app or met Travis, what are the themes or the things you would be like, would absolutely change nothing, do absolutely the same? And what are the things that like, or people or situation where like, might have done that a little differently? Easy question.
Yeah, it's pretty, I've obviously thought about that a lot in the last 5 years or so. Because that company has so much potential. I mean, it literally might have had the best product market fit of all times. Everyone in the world wanted to push a button and get a ride. And that first time you tried Uber was magic. Because this is 2010, and you push a button on your phone and like a car showed up. And now we don't think about how magical that was. So when I met Travis in 2010, I was like, shit, this is a black car service for rich people. How big can it be? And then I saw UberX, and that was sort of the democratization of this. Everyone could do it. Everyone could afford it. And if you live in San Francisco like we did and you guys do, taxi system just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So you drove to the airport and you parked your car there for a 10-day trip. That's what you did. Seeing that magic that's why I joined Travis, and we thought similarly about this is the best idea any of us have ever been involved in. So when you have the best idea, you find the best idea you've ever seen and you've ever been involved in, you go all the way as fast as you can go, because other people are going to figure out that this is a great idea too. And I think some of our strategies playing over today, in that the fast expansion all over the world, including China, including Russia, including all these places, was because of the theory that it was going to be a winner take most market. And you're seeing today with Uber and Lyft in the US, you're seeing that dynamic play out. 10 years later in an interest rate environment that's actually, where it's harder to raise money. So we were wrong about the timing, but right about, I think, the business strategy. So what would I have done differently? I think a couple things. So number one, we would have gone into Instacart's business right around when Instacart did. So you'd have had 3 legs to the stool. You would have had rides, food delivery, and groceries. And those 3 categories, think about what people spend their money on besides rent.
Yes.
It's those 3 things, right? And, and eating out and so on. And eating out could even be tied to rides in some way. The second thing we would have done is the company was growing 300%, 400%, 500% a year. Yeah. But the infrastructure of the company wasn't growing that fast. So imagine the average age of the company, of the employee, was 25. Wow. And they were in far flung places all over the world, in like the 3rd city in Indonesia, with enormous budgets. Yes. And no manager training and no sort of understanding of how to do this, because no one had ever seen this kind of growth before. So getting more control over that and understanding how do you do company building, not business building, those are 2 different concepts, I would have done differently. And I think, had we done that, the company sort of would have made it through the tough parts of 2017 in a much better spot.
I think at the heart of this is, for me, the relationship between you and Travis, because I think the tech industry is full of stories about the founder who brings in the COO archetype, the head of business archetype, the adult archetype, and it often blows up. When I think about success cases, I think about Mark and Cheryl. I think about you and Travis. It's almost like a romance in a different way. You kind of have to figure something out. What do you think made you and Travis work when often these pairings often don't work out?
It's a great question. A couple of things. So I think we're only a few years apart in age, so it wasn't like I was this gray hair coming in to teach him stuff. Right. But we both had been through tough times as a startup. We both lived through bubble number 1 and bubble number 2 as entrepreneurs and people who started tech companies. So we had the grit. We both had the same level of grit and determination. Because neither of us had been in an idea like this. He had that music streaming service and sort of a content management company. I had Tellme, which ended up being somewhat of a success in cloud, which was a tough business, if it was a business at all. And so we had sort of some of these similar experiences and desires to win, a little bit of a chip on your shoulder, desire to win. And then we also saw the world a little bit the same, which was this notion of the best answer wins. And that means that no matter how many levels you are above the junior product manager, if they're right, they're right. Let's celebrate no matter where the idea came from in the organization. It's not about hierarchy. And maybe we've just been in startups too long, so we just thought that way. But big companies don't think that way. Right. They don't work that way at all. The best idea if it comes through the wrong person, it won't get done. Yep. Right. Yep. So those were some of the things. And then I guess the last thing is, it was one of these philosophies that you could say is right or wrong. We disagreed in private, and in public, it was support. So it's like this notion called disagree and commit. Like, I may disagree with you, but I'm going to commit because this decision was made to doing the best I can with this decision. Doing that in private sometimes helps because you can have a more frank conversation. So a CEO running a big company like that needs a conciliary, needs someone they can talk to and have some vulnerability with and talk about problems and not worry about demotivating people or whatever happens downstream. So that's how we developed a camaraderie that really was important for the company's success.
It's so unique because I remember my era with Facebook and Mark and Cheryl. They were very different personalities, very different in age group than I think you and Travis. But at that era, I'm not sure how things were after I left, but it was always clear that there was no daylight between them. Like mom and dad, it's not a gender say, but if people can pick up very quickly if there is some tension or ego or somebody wants more of the limelight or somebody's slightly insecure about the limelight the other person's getting, people very quickly pick up on that. But with Mark and Cheryl, it's always like this person's job is X, this person's job is Y. They don't always agree, but they're going to always put up a united front, which was so key for so many years at Facebook.
it's almost the only way to operate in a high growth environment,
Right.
because everyone's moving so fast that they're looking for, and no one's ever done, like most people have never done this before because they're mostly young people in these companies.
Yeah.
And if they see a seam, it's disconcerting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, well, who do I listen to? Who's
Yeah.
right? Whose side am I on? Wait, what, and that's really, a secret to success if in business is partnering someone who you completely trust, who you have ground rules on how you operate together, and how and you show united front even when you disagree. But disagreeing is still important. You have to disagree, because why else have a partner
Yes.
if you can't disagree, right?
Yeah.
The other, I think, one of the things about Uber is so much happened in such a short period of time. It's like, I kind of sometimes think like, you folks had like multiple startup worth of experiences compressed within maybe a 3-4 year time frame. And for a lot of founders watching this, they are sometimes in the class of, I have product market fit. And I have like a Series A, Series B company. And now I have some decisions. I need to maybe expand into an adjacent category or expand internationally. And these things are hard.
And even like internal to the company, right? Like you have decisions where you've come to a stage where you no longer have to think about, are people willing to pay for this? Like you're beyond that point. But should you up-level your exec team? How do you deal with crossroads at every point of the business? Like, do you have a framework? When you talk to founders now, what do you tell them about different phases of the business itself?
I know it sounds sort of contemporary, but it does kind of matter if you're in a bull or bear market, right?
Right.
To some degree, because if you're in a bull market and you could raise money and take experiments and do adjacencies and launch in places that you may or may not succeed in, but you want to take a shot.
Yeah.
You can do that in those scenarios. So the crossroads aren't that, perpendicular, but you get in a market environment where, it's not that easy. It's not that clear. You just have to take more calculated bets. And my only kind of caveat to this sort of bear market thesis is, if you're a great founder, if you're Parker Conrad and you're Rippling, and you can raise money and you can do these things, because even in a bear market, people are betting on you and your business model, you could still make some of these aggressive choices. But I guess it all comes back to a realistic understanding of how good is your product market fit, what market environment are we in, and what are the risks what's the risk level on these bets? Are these nuts bets? Like we're going to go launch, food delivery in Tibet, or are we're going to launch ride sharing in Moscow? Those are two different levels of bets. So that calculation is the framework in my view.
So this is actually super interesting, because I think we can take this and apply this to maybe some interesting ones from Uber's history. So two things, which is operating in China. So Uber had a very interesting time in China, which is going there, showing up, really no permission. And then there's obviously an interesting partnership, etc., with Didi. And the second one is autonomous driving and auto, with maybe very different outcomes for both. So can we talk us through, those are big, dramatic, large deals, decisions that were made. And our founders may not be facing the magnitude, but it's in a similar spirit. So walk us through the thinking and some of the dynamics, and maybe some of the stories around both.
Yeah. So maybe let's start with China. China's one of my favorite sort of areas of responsibility I had at Uber, because it was so audacious.
Yes, exactly. Because nobody did that. No startup, no company, not even big established companies had any presence in China. Nobody wanted to touch it because it's just all kinds of complexities there.
Right. So Facebook was banned.
Yeah.
Twitter was banned.
Yeah.
Google was essentially thrown out.
Yeah.
And so all the big tech companies had been banned or tried and failed and so on. So this notion of, we're going to go into China, and not in just like Beijing, we're going to go into 40 cities in China, and, was very audacious, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to do that with and there's a strong local competitor.
Yeah.
And they merged, the Uber and Lyft of China merged, Didi and Kuadi, and they merged. And so now everyone thought it's over.
Yeah.
This is like going to be a Chinese monopoly. And here comes Travis and I going, okay, well, let's give this a shot. It's not a sensitive area. Social network is sensitive for the Chinese government. So that's why Facebook and these things, there's a reason where they were like flatly denied access to that market. We were kind of in the middle. We still know location.
Yes.
We still know payment. We still know things about if people are gathering, in Chinese government.
Yes, exactly. I mean, you're like, you have different set of sensitivity there. Did you ever worry at any point being like, we're going to get shut down here? Like, the government is going to be like, pack up and go home. Like, you don't have any business being here.
Constantly. And I constantly was worried about that. And we were pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into the market. It was hair raising.
Yeah.
But we hired an amazing local team. We learned there was two things going on. You hire people who understand how the government works. You kind of get advance notice from the government in China on some things. Like when Didi didn't listen to them about not going public, there was notice. It just wasn't heeded. So we were listening. Our ears were always to the ground, and we didn't hear any signs. But if we did hear anything, we were sort of quick jump on it. But second most importantly, and people don't think about this, if you're a mayor of a big Chinese city, do you want a transportation monopoly? Hell no.
No.
You don't care, American, Chinese. You have KPIs as a Chinese mayor. Your KPIs are to give great jobs, food, water, infrastructure, get people around the city. So for them, they were like, well, this is great. Uber and Didi are competing. They're giving great cheap rides. They compete on price. That sounds great. So you had this like local support, which was very sort of unusual for us, that kept us there long enough so that we could do a deal and merge with the Chinese, company Didi.
Why did you do the deal with Didi?
So I dragged Travis over the finish line on this one. So this is where we were like, we had different views on this. I was more conservative because I was looking at the balance sheet going down by $100 million a month, right? So I was raising billions of dollars on one side and then spending hundreds of millions per month all over the world, but $100 million per month in China.
Yeah.
On subsidies and all these things. Yeah. I just saw an end to that. So what happened was we raised $3.5 billion from the Saudis in May 2016. I'll never forget the day that I was like, send me the wire sort of confirmation when it goes into our bank. It was the largest check any tech company ever received.
If we walk into your living room, would we find it like framed on as like art?
You might. And the next day, I called my counterpart at Didi, Jean Lu, and I said, we're ready to spend this all in China. We raised this money for China, and that brought her to the table because they were like, these guys are serious.
Yeah.
And so, you show them that you're serious, and everyone gets more reasonable all of a sudden.
Yeah. But wait, I want to really unpack this a bit because there is so much colorful kind of personalities and situations around this. So just to maybe unpack it, one, you're doing this, and correct me if I'm wrong, without maybe at the time Travis being fully bought in with the China. Yeah. And I think it's safe to say, the person running Didi, incredibly famous, well-known local figure. Of course, lots of kind of cultural barriers between you and the team. So walk us through how it happened, because I think you were kind of playing this kind of interesting tightrope act between multiple parties working across cultures, and
it's like
talk us through how it happened.
Not only did I have a cultural difference with Jean, but she was extremely upset at me because I hired her cousin at Uber China. And her cousin was a lawyer at Fenwick and West that has a small office in Beijing. And I met her and she was great. Yeah. And I hired her not because she was Jean's cousin, but because she was awesome. Yeah. But imagine this family dinner now of these two deaf competitors. So I had to also overcome a personal sort of grudge about that. But it was so incredibly difficult because we had this actual spending going on, threatened spending to come. All investors in both companies, remember there's Western investors in Didi, right? This was DST and, SoftBank and Tiger. Yeah. Looking and going, oh my gosh, you guys are all burning all of our money. You're lighting it on fire. It's got a whole investor angle. Yeah. They're freaking out. And so it became an act of like, okay, I'm going to bring back a deal that Travis can't say no to, because it's going to be a good deal. Yeah. It's going to be a great deal. Yeah. It's going to be fair. So I had to get that from Jean. Yes. And so I had to both convince her that we were serious, which we were, but also show that we were serious about this. I was a deal closer. So every time I made her a commitment, like, I'm going to get you an answer on this issue tonight, or it was 4 a.m, I called her, I was on WeChat all the time. I was like living up to commitment to build trust so that she knew she had a partner on the other side who could get things done. And she did the same thing for me. And that's what good deal people do. You show that you can get shit done.
Yeah.
And you prove it with small actions so that no one believes they're getting gamed. And eventually we got past the mistrust and we did a deal from beginning to end. A cross-border $7 billion merger was done in 60 days from zero to income.
The previous part, until you said the 60 days, you made it seem like this was like a multi-quarter journey of like, eventually winning her support, the team support, all of that. But you had such a compressed window and skeptics all around and cynics all around. How do you do it?
So I used to say this about being in a startup. When your company's small, you're running a tribe. It's a tribe.
Yeah,
a lot of people think like you.
Yeah.
They act like you.
Yeah.
They're motivated as you.
Yeah.
When your company gets big and has all these other stakeholders, is civilization. And civilizations, there's a reason they can't move as fast because they have to build consensus.
Yeah.
And so the deal chops I'd been working on for 20 years, I was, in my 40s at the time, was like this careful balancing of interests and information distribution and communication at the right moments to the right parties to bring everyone along. And it could have fallen apart at any time, but I was very deliberate about all the stakeholders and how, when I updated Travis and where I told him the deal was and what I was telling Gene, it was like an orchestra. It was an orchestra, right? And I was the conductor trying to like get it all to be a symphony that people wanted to hear.
I think at the heart of this is two people building trust, and you and Gene building trust, and two people maybe who don't maybe have the reason to previously, right? Like your competition, you're across borders, or all these rumors, you don't know who's maybe doing what to each other. How do you kind of like get this other person to be like, well, I'm actually going to do this, especially when, you're not in the same country, you don't have the same social, cultural context at all.
I tell entrepreneurs this all the time. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there first. So before the 60-day period started, every time I went to Beijing, I'd say, Gene, can I come to your office? I would go to her office. I would go on my own without an entourage, and she could bring in whoever she wanted to a meeting. I just showed that I was in the game every day. I was never going to quit and seeing it, because I wanted to know if that moment ever came, she knew that I was reliable and I would come in every time. And I didn't play the ego games. I went to see her. I went to her. She wanted to pick dinner. I went to wherever she was going. So I put the extra effort in. And I think for entrepreneurs today, especially in a bear market where mergers should happen more, you should know your partners in a time when you don't want or need a deal, so that if you do, you have the basis of a relationship. They know that you respect them because you've made the effort to respect them.
Right.
And so my job in a lot of ways in Uber and beyond China was like making sure we always preserved optionality. So I built relationships with all of our competitors all over the world.
Yeah.
I spent time with all of them. I went to see them, and I just tried to ego down, business up. Right, that instinct.
I love it because, in some way, I'm a VC and we often negotiate with founders, and the way I think about it, it's a infinite game. It's a long running game. A founder who you may not want to work with today, maybe you want to invest in a later round, or maybe you want to invest in their next company, or you might want to invest in their roommate's company. So much of what you're doing is you are trying to, of course, you kind of have to preserve strength and you have to do the right thing. And sometimes deals don't work out for any number of reasons, but you want to act in good faith. You want to be professional, decent, and be able to always kind of get on a call and they'll be like, well, I don't agree with this person. And they're kind of a fierce negotiator, but I kind of like the guy or girl or whatever. Right? And you always need that.
You do. And I always picked up the phone when an investor called who was freaking out about the money we were spending in China. I just didn't duck things, right? It was leaning into hard problems, leaning into building relationships, leaning in to taking the first step without seeming weak. And frankly, if you do it enough, like, you don't seem weak, you seem confident. You're like, wow, this guy came to my office in the middle of Beijing, 3 times in the last year, he must know something I don't,
So this is a segue I was kind of waiting for, because I was I've known you for a while. We've known you for a while, but I wanted to get this right. We were doing some homework, so I asked a lot of people. Every single person said some version of Emil is the best business mind, deal maker, negotiator, business development person that exists in Silicon Valley across the board. And I'm not blowing hot air. I think it's kind of a common perception. So what I would love to do is if you had to teach somebody who's never negotiated a deal before, like how do you approach the construct of a deal?
I took a negotiation class once. I think it was in law school at Stanford, and they teach you these concepts like BATNA, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And the reason it's all wrong is because there's no behavioral economics being applied to it. And so the thing about negotiations is that there's a behavioral element to every one of them because you're dealing with humans on the other side. And if it was easy, people would just like do spreadsheets, send across like a bidding thing, and like they'd be done. Like what? You just like do a deal because the numbers show you should, right?
Yeah.
But there's a ton of reasons for someone's motivation to give you a provision in a deal that's important to you versus not. Are they getting promoted? Are they trying to get promoted? Did they have a bad quarter? Are they worried strategically about their position in the market? What's their competitive landscape look like? So if I were to start from scratch with someone who's like, I'd never done it before, I'm a business development associate on your team, I'd say, okay, well, like, let's start with like, what's the strategy? Okay, that's like strategy is X. Well, you need a partnership with American Express, let's say, because use that example.
Yeah.
I'd say, okay, well, why do they want a partnership with us? Right. So why, what are they walking around thinking about with regard to our company? Right. And like, just be unbiased about it. And most of the time when you're a small company, it's like, they don't think about your company.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So then you're like, okay, how do I so then your strategy is actually one step first. Like, how do I make them care? Right. And then you start out with, then you're like, well, I make them care by finding someone there who might care. So I draw an org chart. My first thing on any deals, I draw an org chart. What is this company?
That's great.
Who sits where in the org and what do they do? And let me find out everyone on my network who knows someone on this org chart. Right? And let's start with the people.
Yeah.
And start about where they sit. And then let me go find someone who cares or I can make care.
Yeah.
And then okay, let's say you get them to care. Now, and you have there's salesmanship and all that involved. Now, you have to like position what you want in a way that makes a difference for them.
Yeah.
And the more senior you go, the more small things don't matter to them. So you have this sort of conflict between you may want something small with them, and you may think it's best to go senior, but they actually care less about that. Right?
You literally don't exist to them.
I tell people this all the time. Like if they want something from a big tech company, they'll be like, "Oh, I'm going to mail Zuck." I'm like, "Don't do that, right? Go grab a drink with the PM who runs that feature.
Yeah.
You're going to get 100 because Zuck is just going to ignore you or email it to somebody or just nobody's going to do it."
Yeah.
Okay, so I think I love the homework and the prepared mindset, right? Yeah. The other thing I think you talked about, is the setting the scene, right? Where do you do the meeting? Yeah. Observing everything. So talk to us about how you gather intelligence, like once you are like just physically
if you're in the game, what happens from there?
A couple of ideas that have worked for me over time. I always like to have another person in the room on my side, whether they're speaking or not. So when the meeting is done, I could say, did you see the same thing I saw? Did you see something different than I saw?
Right.
Did you see a facial expression when I was making this pitch that I didn't see?
Yeah.
So that had full visibility into the body language of what the other side has said. And even I don't mind taking the notes. It's not about someone carrying your bags and senior or junior, just another set of eyes and ears listening to what I heard. That's number one. Number two, body language matters a lot. Again, it's back to this behavioral economics thing. Like how many times have you walked into a room to do a deal and then the person doesn't want to be there. Their boss just told them to go.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, and it's not just deals. You look at interviews, you look at so many of these meetings of people where you can tell in the first 3 minutes that this is not going to go well. And you're just spending the rest of the time going through this kabuki dance of just making this whole thing go terribly. And then you walk away, which you knew all up front already.
Actually, it's super interesting to hear the two people dynamic, because often, and sometimes I find this, when you're one-on-one, you can kind of create intimacy and a shared hey, we are in this together. And the moment you have another person, it shifts the chemistry, right? A little, because you're for example, talking to you and Emil, for example, if I was meeting you and I'm like, hey, we are immigrants and we have kids and we bond and we kind of have a thing and we may have a shared bit of gossip. But the moment there's somebody else, it shifts the dynamic slightly. And sometimes I think there are pros and cons. How do you think about that?
I think there's some exceptions to this practice, but it has some other values too. The thing I tried to do on my team as a leader was work with everyone on my team on some project once a year. Mm-hmm. So they got access to me and how I did things. Mm-hmm. They saw things that I was doing at that level that maybe they were 5 years away from being able to do themselves. Mm-hmm. So there was an advantage to just having them along anyway, right? And yes, are there sensitive conversations that happen one-on-one or sort of camaraderie building ones? Sure. But just as a practice, it's I just found the additional information I get from them hearing and listening to what I'm seeing, plus the learning, ends up over 7 or 8 times out of 10 outweighing the one-on-one camaraderie building. Because you know what? The one-on-one camaraderie building is all the same. Family, weather, where you live, it's all the same.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And it's where'd you go to college? Football. It's all those things, and then you repeat them in every meeting.
Well, we hate the same people in tech. Oh yes, we bond over that. Okay, maybe that's for a different episode. But okay, all right. So now, you have two people in a meeting. What's next?
Yeah. So let's take one of these examples I just gave you. It's this person doesn't want to be in the room, right? Mm-hmm. So you're now hopefully emotionally intelligent about this. So now you've got a game time decision. Are you going to go through the motions, or are you going to just throw a bomb in the meeting to change it to see if you could change the dynamic? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so things I would do, for example, I'd say wow, you look like you'd definitely rather be someone else. What do you want to talk about? I don't know.
Has it worked? Has it ever shifted the dynamic?
All the time, because you're making someone laugh. They're like, yeah, man, I don't want to be here. And maybe it's, they had a tough weekend at home because they were taking care of the kid. Who knows?
Man.
I'm going to try that. Right? Oh my God, that I would say that takes some balls to actually suddenly be like, hey, I'm going to go out on a limb.
Call out the thing. I think. So here's what I've seen. I've watched a lot of your content before on negotiation and your tips there. And before, a while ago, I had my own startup. And I had to go talk to this big e-commerce retailer. And I was in the room. I'd never done anything like this before. I had no business being there. I'm this small potatoes for them, a rounding error. And I did every mistake, just watching all of your episode and content. I did not put together an org chart. I did not read the room right. My body language was terrible. I didn't have another person with me. There was no wingman, wingwoman, whoever. And I knew going in one of the meetings that it was just going to go horribly, but I kind of put up this brave face and just did the presentation. And I was like, why the fuck did I do that? I should have just cut my losses and moved away from the whole thing. We eventually ended up partnering, but for a completely different set of reasons, nothing to do with this. But I made every mistake in this. And every time I see you say it, in my mind, I'm like, damn it, that's what I would have done differently. That's the thing. That was so messed up.
I love the bomb story. I want to steal this, actually. And somebody goes, what the heck? I'm going to point to them in an episode. I actually picked up a milder version of this tactic from Cheryl, who, about if the meeting wasn't going to her liking, what she would do, she'd be like, okay, let's take a break here. When we walk out of this room, what are you folks going to say about us? You're going to be like, well, those bozos, or are you going to like it? And it's such a great way to kind of shift the energy or the narrative. Well, let's all follow up and I'll email you and we'll set up a thing, blah, blah, blah. It'll totally shift the kind of the narrative of the meeting. And I was like, I'm going to steal that technique.
It's totally smart. And that's a brilliant technique for getting signal earlier rather than later, this thing is going to work or not. Because part of deal making is actually not spending time on deals that shouldn't happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So when Charles did that, it's a great tactic, because if they're like, you know what, actually, we just don't see it here, XYZ here happening here.
Yeah.
And instead of telling you 3 months from now when you burn an analyst's time or, your time for, 40 hours over 3 months, you get like zero. You get all those hours back.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you get to go do something
So I
else.
guess then question for you, you come off as a very persistent person. And
is that a polite way of saying Emil is not one of the toughest negotiators in Silicon Valley?
Gritty. I love, being persistent.
He's smiling now, but it's because he's not like, he's taking a break between companies. Otherwise, he's like scary.
No, but when do you know when to give up? Giving up is hard for some people. Like, being gritty is like, if it's a part of your identity and what you're really proud of, when do you know when to walk away?
I got to address your first thing about I'm a tough negotiator or whatever. I'm scary. I would say this: what I endeavor to be when people say one of the best deal guys is actually I make deals that should happen when they wouldn't otherwise happen. I make them happen faster, and I make deals that shouldn't happen not happen faster. Right. So it's actually getting to yes or no faster than the next guy or gal, and not screwing it up over some dumb mistake. But back to your now I forget the question. It was,
when do you give up?
I mean, and we're about to see a lot of this in startup lands.
Yeah.
And there's an when you have some existential stuff going on, there is a lot more stick-to-itiveness that you have to have. And when you're saving a company or you're doing it in a way that you might not have if it was sort of a nice to have, or sort of, there were other people you could do the deal with, and there's the personal dynamic didn't that work or whatever. So when I guess when to quit is when your survival is not dependent on it. And if the time spent is going to be, when you risk adjust it, is going to be worth more than the reward, right? And that's I walk in with calculus all the time running in my brain with deals. Like 100% of the time, I'm adjusting the calculus. Is this worth it? Is it worth the time? Is it worth whatever else I might be doing? So you could actually win deals with a lot of time, but sometimes like the effort itself is more costly than the benefits. So it's a running calculus. It's like a running Excel deal spreadsheet.
To me, I feel like the best deal makers are often unemotional. Like when you say calculus, I think the people who are not good at like making the deals happen and when it falls apart, and it's no critique on like any one person, it's usually because the emotion clouds the whole thing and they can't run the math, or they get totally distracted by who said what in what meeting, like what happened there, and their like ego comes into play, or they feel like they could do better, deserve better. How do you deal with that? Like it feels like a natural part of human existence.
I mean, it is so now, and this is part of sort of my behavioral economics point of view on negotiation, which is it is not preordained that this deal should happen, even though all the economics point to it, because of these dynamics. So it's adjusting around them to try to make them happen or not, and if you are in control of your emotions, you have an advantage over people who are not in control of their emotions. That it still might mean that their emotions are so strong they're going to kill the deal, but you've given it the best shot forward, right? You can't change people. But you could try to organize a process that takes account of how they work.
I think one thing you've been known to do well is when you're in a big tech company or in a position of power, when you're in a deal, you often have this balance of, often a deal is about when do you share which bit of information to which party. And I think there is a balance between projecting strength, right, and being humble. And these things seem in conflict, but I think you've renowned to have done a great job of it. I can't tell you how many deals I've seen totally messed up by a Facebook or a Google, because they will come and be like, hey, we are the big appendages in town, and we're gonna do whatever, and just blow up a deal just from that attitude. So how do you both project like strength, resolve, but also humility, friendliness, all that?
Yeah, I call it riding the confidence humility line. Like that's the line, that line of being confident but humble. is what you're aiming at. That's the ideal, right? Because everyone likes someone who's humble, but also everyone likes someone who's confident. No one likes people who are arrogant, and no one likes people
who are not confident.
Right. So who lack confidence in what they're doing. So it's this. Those are the two things you want to project.
Yep.
Right. And if you do that well, one marker of that, how I do the sort of, did I do that well, is the relationships I have with people who are on the other side of the table for me years afterwards, right? So Gene Lou and I, we have a laugh every time we talk or whatever, because we walked this line together. The people at Amex, at AT&T, all the people I did deals with throughout my career, I have a camaraderie with them because I tried to walk this line, and I mostly got it right. But I think the projecting strength thing, I'll tell you this on Google, like, I don't know if I should say this. Well, I'll say it and you can decide whether we should keep it in the episode. But I hated doing business with Google. Hated it.
Why?
Because they would Bigfoot any company and every company, no matter what. So I would have like an account manager for Google Maps screaming at me over the phone about, was I like a freight company? And I was like, I'm not a freight company, man. I'm just trying to buy your maps. And he's like, you have to decide if you're a freight company. I was like, and dude, those kinds of things. So I was really resistant of hiring anyone who worked in Google Biz Dev. I was resistant to doing any deals with them because they had so much power and they acted like it.
Oh gosh, yeah. This triggered. By the way, we are on YouTube. This video is going to get killed on YouTube algorithm because of this. But I a couple of years ago, I had left Facebook, and somebody I was working with at the time ran into a very junior down the stack Facebook person who did the exact same thing. They were like, "We can crush you, dominate you, bow down to us, or the business equivalent thereof," and it was going to blow up. I called up the Facebook person. I was like, "Hey man, I'm an ex-employee. I know exactly where you folks stand. You're blowing something up really good, and but this is so common." And to be honest, it actually happens more in the junior levels because you'll never see this behavior from a Cheryl or an Eric Schmidt. I mean, they will. If they have you,
you'll know it.
They will know it. They'll know it, right? But they will do it in a polite way. They never have to say it outright. And it's often but this is so true of a lot of the big tech, several big tech junior BD people.
I will say this: I found dealing with Facebook way easier than dealing with Google when I was at Uber.
Yeah.
I was working with David Marcus on Messenger.
Oh yeah, Marcus. Dan Rose, Marcus, all those guys are amazing.
Yeah. And then, but Google was especially hard. And I made a pact I told myself, I was like, I'm never going to do that to a small company. So when small companies will come to Uber to do business with us or to do a partnership or need to get bought, I always call the entrepreneur back, always responded. Was exceedingly polite because I didn't want people to not want to approach us because we got that reputation.
I often thought of it, and I know less about BD, but more about product management as such. I often thought, companies like Facebook had, good set of people on that side of things, on the business product side of things, because they really had to fight. Nothing was given to them right off the bat, and every point percentage of user growth, everything was like a claw up every day of getting into a war room and figuring out where what happened. Did internet get shut off in this country? What went? You have the problems that you have. Victory was never taken for granted, and to this day, Facebook comes in from this mindset of just extreme paranoia. And that I think it starts with Zuck and trickles downwards. And so this company is so fucking big and everybody acts like an underdog. Everyone's like, oh my God, we're going to die tomorrow. And I kind of like that. I like people who are cut from that because you need to have that grit and ability to be able to always stay a bit humble and feel like you're an underdog that is up against a big beast.
Yeah, look, Google is literally the greatest money machine of all times.
Yeah.
And so they didn't have to do any of, I guess, look, I'm not trying to discount what they built. It's an amazing company. The acquisitions they did were amazing, all the things. Yeah. But I'm saying they just came from a different place than Facebook did. Facebook whiffed on mobile. The IPO was tough. There was a lot of hard stuff there. Yeah. So the grit that filtered down through the org is evident to outsiders.
Oh, yeah. I want to, since that's a masterclass in negotiation, this is awesome. I want to ask you one thing, which I think a lot of people run into, which is, I think often people fall in this trap where somebody wants X and the other person wants X plus something or X minus something, right? You're negotiating, the most simple, you're negotiating a paycheck, right? Your comp or a valuation. And I think the master negotiators or deal makers find a way around when people are like, I want one number, you want different number. And how do you handle when it just comes down to, I want more, I want less? How do you even avoid getting that? How do you handle that?
Like you said, if you're thinking holistically about a deal, there's often other levels that can make up for value points. So there is this notion, again, let's say you work at X company and you're like, I need to bring home $1 million deal, or I don't make President's Club at my, for my sales org, right? So you're like, I'm on their side. It's like, how do I give this person $1 million? You're like, okay, well, maybe I could split it into chunks. Maybe I could put performance criteria on there, but the headline's still $1 million, right? It's sort of, how do you change some of the other things in the deal? Because again, part of the behavioral economics is like, what is most important in this sprint? It's like, they have to hit this number. If you find that out, then you could organize around that. So finding out their hierarchy of needs,
I love it,
allows you the flexibility, right?
All right, I'm going to make the a very interesting segue here from this point, which is the optics of something, the headline versus the underlying thing, which is one of the topics I think you and I and us have been talking about in private. Is we no longer live in a zero rate environment. A lot of folks need to be, thinking about down rounds, layoffs, M&A. We're going to get into all of that. But maybe the one interesting segue is a lot of founders are often tempted to, well, I want the headline valuation, but with structure, which I think is a version of exactly what you're just talking about. So when you talk to a founder, or when you're on the other side, how do you advise founders on valuation versus structure, and how to think about that
in this environment?
In this environment, post zero rate interest.
Take what I said about negotiations, and it does not apply to raising money in this environment. We're in you've heard me say this, Aarthi, before. It's like, we're not in a world of FOMO anymore by investors. It's JOMO. It's joy missing out, right? So they're happy to miss out, right? Because anything that smells bad in a deal, they're like, I'm out. So it's different. So I do think when you come to this structure versus headline thing, the problem with structure is that the next 3 rounds you do are likely to be structured, because no one ever goes backward on structure, right? And so the only reason to do the headline round with structure is if it's literally your last round. It's literally your last round, because you don't have to raise anymore. So you're not going to be piling structure on structure. And look, and this is complex, so there's no perfect answers here. Sometimes headline valuations matter to employees. They matter for momentum. They matter, like, there is, again, a human cost to doing down rounds that is non-zero, right? So it is, again, a calculus of what's right. Now, very few companies now that actually need to raise money can confidently go, this is the last round I'll ever raise. It's more likely than not that you should be just doing a down round, calculate the anti-dilution protection, and keep your cap table clean so that you can do it. And the reality is, things were overvalued. Multiples have changed. There's no shame in your game, right? That's just how it is.
By the way, for folks who are not deep into VC inventory, think of what structure is. It's basically how people can get that money back. Who gets money back before anybody else. Google pari passu. There's a lot of fun stuff that which can go down. But maybe I think this is we live in a bad market. We live in March 2023 or February 2023. What advice do you have for founders who might have raised Series B, Series C at some really strong valuation, and now maybe don't have product fit, market fit? They can trying to figure out what they want. What advice do you find yourself giving often?
Yeah, so different categories. So the companies that have way more cash than they need because they were lucky or smart enough to have raised money at the end of 21, and have this massive cash balance, they have a little bit more flexibility. I still think they should be cutting costs, still doing the optimization thing, because it's good discipline, it's good muscle memory, and if you haven't found product market fit, but you have to pile of cash, you still have to go find it. And you don't know how long that's going to take, right? But it's not a 5-alarm fire, right? Because they have the cash. And there's a lot of companies out there with insane cash balances that they never would have had. They won't have going forward in a new bear market, right? Then there's the middle company, which kind of has product market fit, kind of has enough cash for like a year and a half.
Yeah.
They better start front loading some of these optimizations on the cost side,
right now. Yeah.
so that they're not more dramatic later.
Yeah.
And no matter how many times I tell a first-time entrepreneur, trust me, this layoff is not going to be big enough.
Yeah.
It's just
what is big enough? Like, how much cash should you have in your balance sheet?
I don't know if I have a one-size-fits-all question, but I worry about the companies that are in this pseudo-product-market fit era that have less than 12, 18 months of cash.
Yeah.
Because that's not a lot of time to find it
and then scale. Yeah.
Execute on it and remember, even if you have a good business right now, you're not going to get good terms. So you kind of want the Fed to stop raising rates for every little more to come back and have product market fit and have an efficient structure so that if it takes another quarter or two, you can survive without freaking out.
So you're looking at give yourself about 2 years of runway for you to be able to get to that spot. Ish.
I think at least 18. Yeah.
18.
I think 18 because I think 12 months, I think in my mind is a 5-alarm fire. Because first of all, if you're at 12 months, it takes 2-3 months for even unless you have Emil Michael raising money for you, it takes at least a few months to start the process to the money to hit your bank account.
Yeah.
And by the way, if you're going to shut down the company, that takes several months also. So when somebody says 12 months, I'm like, chop 4 or 5 months off of that. That's the actual amount of time you have. And then you're in 6 months and your company's going to die. And then your stuff's getting real.
Totally. And the absolute characteristic that's 100% true right now, deals are taking, even for good companies, 2 to 4 times longer than they did before. Yeah. So it was 30 to 60 days is now looking like 90 to 120 days, even for good, just to raise money, because how many more partner meetings now? Yeah. You have to get more people in a partnership on board because individual partners don't want to take as much risk as they were taking before. They want more consensus. They want more data, deeper due diligence. There's, some investors right now are just totally risk off. They're zero. So filling your top of funnel is harder and takes more time. So you're totally right that 12 months is sort of getting to that 5-alarm fire situation.
Now on the optimization side, Aarthi and I always talk about when somebody's laid off, it's tough, it's hard. We're always super empathetic. We had people around us, we've been through, and especially as immigrants, we understand the kind of if you're on a visa, all of that. But when a founder, one of our theories is for the last few years before this environment, Silicon Valley has gotten soft and grew exponentially. Often the large tech companies, but also maybe some of the companies who didn't have the Google ad business to rely on or the Facebook business to rely on. So I am curious to get your sense of Silicon Valley as kind of behavior and the playbook and companies were running over the last few years and how it may be shifting or you think it should shift now.
The Great Reset.
Yeah. Great Reset.
Do we need to be hardcore? Do we need to be hardcore, Emil?
It is over. It is this notion of being able to have not only more people than you need, but then the salaries and sort of benefits and stock-based comp and all those things being at an elevated place because there was so much competition for talent.
Yeah.
Those things have all kind of unraveled at once a little bit, right? So we're starting from a different point now. And if you as a leader are not adapting quick enough, and I don't think they are. I don't think on average these companies are adapting. Even Elon Musk proved that you could do things with 80% less people. That's not translating down that fast. I don't think a little bit, but it's just it's not all the way there.
It's too slow. It's too slow. Trust me. People want to, but it's too slow. It's good. Yeah.
And then you get in this 1, 2, 3 layoffs, closer to cash out date, more likely to do a down round, more likely to do structure. All these things cascade. Down. Yeah. So I am trying to give folks a reality check, especially if they've never been through it before, that these things just get all reset every 10 years or so. We have a reset in the tech markets for different reasons each time. And there's different answers each time to what to do. But in this thing, you got to be hardcore about it. The remote work thing gives gives you an opportunity to hire people in different geographies that have much like, not the $500,000 product manager, the $200,000 product manager in Chicago, and what is the difference between them? Like there's some real hard trade-offs. And yes, I'm not trying to ignore the human tragedy of it because that's real, but also failing is real. And when you fail, you're not just failing, yourself, you're failing all the employees who remain, all the investors, your family, if they were angels. So there is long-term benefits to having a company that's the right size.
Some of these companies grew 90%, 100% over the last 2-3 years. So even though you see the layoffs, if you look at the actual math, they're actually just back to sometimes the numbers from a year ago. It's so it's not as dramatic as it may sound. What do you think is happening at some of the inner circles of these big tech companies, and what do you think is going to happen at, we don't have to talk about anyone, or maybe we can, but like in terms of like right sizing these companies?
I am surprised. Well, so number one, it's just not existential for Google or Facebook to cut more. It just isn't, right? It's just not. So let me, I'm totally making assumptions here. So why did Zuckerberg give this like efficiency earnings call last time? It's because he wanted his stock to go up. Why? Because he wants employees to be motivated, and everything's down in the dumps when the stock's half the price it was a year ago. So like he wants to do it by showing efficiency, but he's only going to do it to the extent he needs to because it's not existential. So like you're just not facing the same kind of things that mid-cap companies are facing.
Actually, can I disagree with you?
Sure.
I have no inside information, but from my experience with Mark and knowing nothing about what he actually wants to do now, my theory is whenever he says something, it's often meant for his employees first. And I think the message is one of like, I'm kind of like, translating here, we have gotten soft, and it's time to buckle up. So this means, hey, a lot of you who are directors or managers, M1, M2, you got to roll up your sleeves, you got to write code, you got to write the spec, less promos, times are going to be tougher. And I think what Mark often tries to do is try and send a message inside. And sometimes the best way to do it, who does? But I think it's often about like, hey, you can't just expect a promo and a bigger org.
I don't think you both are disagreeing, though. I think what Emil's like trying to say is like, sure, you can send a message internally, but how much do you really need to cut if you're a Facebook or a Google? Like, you still do have the money printing machine in the basement. Unlike a lot of these other startups who have the perks and the culture and the benefits of a Facebook and a Google, but can no longer afford to do so.
That's right. That's the difference. Most companies are not Facebook and Google. And they don't need a cafeteria with the fast, like, a Michelin star chef or what, those things. And
free kombucha.
Free kombucha, massage therapy, and look, let's take Snap as an example. The company's got some real challenges. It's not a money printing machine. And if you're Evan, like you're going to take whatever right sizing you do way more, go much closer to, to a real change in headcount than you are if you're Mark Zuckerberg, I think. Right?
So what do you think is going to happen with these set of startups, like the Series C-ish kind of companies that have started doing layoffs, but general consensus seems to be it's nowhere near enough. So are we going to see more of these? Are we going to see in like 18 months or 12 months, companies just like declaring bankruptcy? Like, what do you think is going to happen?
I think that there are a few companies that are going to get it and they're going to make it. And there are a few companies that are going to get it too late and not make it. And there's going to, that's like Q3, Q4 this year, where the money you raised in last quarter of 21, now you're talking your 2 years past, so back to our 2-year conceptual point, right? So they're going to sort of run out of options, and no one wants to fund a falling knife. So like you said, Sriram, you got to back away from the end date to be 6 months before, 9 months before to make decisions so that you don't get in that spot, right? So you're going to see some pain out there, and then you're going to see a lot of companies on the merger market, and then the acquirers are going to take advantage of that in price.
One interesting subcategory, I think, of these companies is, and this is very unusual, just given the dynamics of the fundraising market before, is I think there are a lot of Series C, Series B style companies who have runway for years, but zero product market fit. And I think I think one of the challenges is like, if you're a founder, like you can run this company till kingdom come, but you're nobody using your stuff, like part of it, if you're a SaaS company, there's like, not enough budget for people to go buy you, etc., etc. What do you give those partners? Because they're nowhere close to facing the existential urgency of some of these other folks.
Yeah, that's like so hard on that one, because one of the other things that I've observed is that, and this has always been true, private to private tech mergers are hard. Like mergers. I'm not talking buying a small company if you're, private Uber. I'm talking about like a substantial acquisition. Everyone thinks their stock's worth more than they know it is, who's going to be CEO, all these things. I do think in these scenarios, sort of thinking about merging with someone where you bring your cash to the table and your expertise, and maybe it's a more interesting project that now has more a chance for a product market fit. It's a broader enterprise suite when you put two things together. It's taking some of what you've built and adding it to some other effort that makes it closer to product market fit. It's something I would think about. And I tell the entrepreneur, do you really want to be running a zombie for 5-7 years? Right. If you don't have a great idea, that's okay.
Right.
Like, that's fine. Let's let's do your best to this. And then when you have a great idea, people will finance you on the next one because you did the smart thing with this one.
Yep. Yeah. So basically you're saying return money if it's not working out right now. Just wind it down, cut your losses.
Or find a partner that you can merge these companies together with low ego, which is really hard to do.
I mean,
easier said than done.
But I think psychologically, what if they've taken a bunch of money off the table in secondary? What happens then?
Man, that's just a whole new world. No, it's back to the hardcore thing.
Yeah.
Across every company I've ever worked at as a startup, 4 of them, I've never taken a dime in secondary.
Yeah.
And for me and Travis, it was a signal that we're not going to eat our dinner until you eat yours.
Right.
Right. We make sure there's enough food on the table so we can all eat.
And I think we talked about this, right? I don't particularly even blame the founders for taking secondary off the table, because the market incentivized them to be hey, there's money here. Do you want to take it? It's like there on in front of you. Pick up anything you want.
I think Stuart particularly, like if they're handing out cookies, you take a cookie.
Yeah, totally. So this is not a criticism. It's more just like time. The game on the field's changed.
Right, exactly. And so now the downstream effects, we're seeing that. So what happens in that case where the founder's taken money off the table, the company is like, okay, like not really product market fit, but maybe early signs, but not enough runway, have 2-3 years-ish left. What happens then?
The giving back cash is just I've seen it so few times.
Yeah.
And that's why I keep bringing up this, is there a merger partner? Is there can you kind of combine with another private company?
Yeah.
So that, the VC firms, did they really want the cash back? I don't know. You tell me, do you want 40% of your cash back, or do you want to roll it into something that has a, higher chance of success?
Yeah, I think it's so dependent on, I would say, is the founder still committed? Do they still want to do this, or are they burnt out? And sometimes only they know the answer to those questions. And look, every VC firm is so different. So I can only and I think our firm kind of has, a certain, we really kind of back the founder in so many things. But I think it really comes down to, what the founder really wants to do, which also, I think the secondary thing, I know it's controversial, but I see it playing a lot of ways. I think the very easy metaphor people say, well, somebody takes a lot of money and they're off living in the south of France or something. That's not actually always the case. I think what happens when people get wealthy is that it just amplifies their personalities in all directions. Like Zuckerberg, used to drive a Toyota Camry, and he'd be happy to drive a Toyota.
No, I completely disagree with this whole thing. No.
But I think there's a different phenomenon which sometimes happens, which is founders then feel like they should take bigger swings, and I think it amplifies your personality.
You can say that's all fine, but I think what you're trying, if I wake up tomorrow $50 million richer, I don't know if I will have the hunger and the drive that I had yesterday. It just is not going to.
I totally disagree.
I just think you're going to have. This is a disservice to investors. It's a disservice to employees. This is this whole taking secondary off the table and being it doesn't really impact the founders. The hungry founders always work. That is not true. You're going to have to align incentives for the employees, for the people working on this, for the investors putting in money, all on the same side.
I think that's right. Nobody's disagreeing. If there is I would say the core principle I learned about in VC is the moment you have misalignment of incentives, shit blows up, right? So you need perfect alignment from LPs to VCs to founders to execs to employees to customers. Like you need back and forth. And you often
Emil, what do you think?
Man, it's such a hard thing because this is where definitely I'm old school in this way, where it's just, it propelled me personally to not have the resources. Like that was my experience. Maybe it's the immigrant scarcity ethic, or it's like, if I can punish myself, I'll work harder, right? But that's me, and I don't want to apply that same sort of motivations, sort of hierarchy to other people. So I do think, there are extremes, like someone taking multiple hundreds of millions of dollars off the table. It's like, I can't imagine a scenario that's going to turn out well, right? But if someone's like, their third startup, their 40s, they have kid, and they're taking 5 million out, and and they're doing it responsibly and whatever. Like, okay, that's you can, you can't be against some things like that because they actually, that might motivate them more. So
or sometimes it's like, they're multiple years in, and if they're just stressed about, hey, the mortgage or kids, especially later. I actually want to go back to something interesting you're talking about, which is mergers and acquisitions, which is we are seeing almost nothing happening in the market. Now, the easy answer is everything happening with kind of the regulatory overhang. But is it due to that? Part of that is a lot more else going on. How are things going to change?
For the big guys, yes, that's definitely Lena Khan and the FTC. And the prime example of that is Facebook trying to buy this like metaverse $30 million company, and like they had to sue and win in the courts for 3 years. They probably spent more on legal fees than they did on the company. That sort of stuff has a chilling effect, which I really think is bad for the country, bad for business, and so on. But when you're talking mid-market, a company like PayPal, or pick your company that's not sort of in the crosshairs of the regulator, they're just not buying stuff, and even like I'm much more upset about the private to private deals. Like lots of competitors should merge. They just should, because private to private, you have a better shot being bigger, better shot with runway, cutting SG&A, improving runway. Don't throw money away on subsidies. There should be more of that. Now, those are hard deals to do because of social issues. Who's running them? The social issues predominate in that. But people are going to regret not merging with their competitors. When the clock strikes 12 at the end of this year, early next year.
I think the reverse of the Stuart Butterfield, like take a cookie, is sometimes when the music stops, like you want to be one of the first people to get a chair, because if somebody else gets a chair before you, you're in trouble.
Don't try to be the last one.
It's somewhat related, but slightly different. What makes a good founder? You've worked with a bunch of them in the past. What are the attributes you think?
So beyond ambition, I do think there is a sort of there's a grit component here, right? And there's you could get knocked down and keep coming. You can try something and fail and keep coming back. And that grit, that hardcore grit, I do feel like there's a little less of this in some of the founders sort of on average today, because they haven't been through 2009, they haven't been through 2001. So I feel like this class of founders that are going through this gritty time now, they're going to be sort of the bosses on the next one, because they'll be like, okay, I know how to navigate this.
I have the battle scars to show.
I like it, because I thought you were going to be like, well, we had it tough in our day, we climbed it. You're like, no.
The next batch
is going to be even worse. Actually, how much of it do you when I think about your class, I think of you, I think of the Partovi brothers. There is kind of this set of folks, I think, who kind of came up the ranks and really dominate large parts of tech together. How much of it do you think was you being an immigrant and wanting to make it? Because we are immigrants, and very different kind of stages of life in career. A lot of the folks who listen to this are immigrants, are watching from India. Kind of curious, like, if you kind of had to, it's hard to do this objectively, but unpack what got you here. How much of it is being an immigrant, or what was it?
Yeah, and then I'd add Alfred Lin to that list. Like, we're literally all in the same class in school. And the two things happened then. One, if you graduated in 1994, the internet and tech business was just getting going. So it was the first time you're like, I don't have to be a banker or a consultant. I could do something in tech, right? And so there was a moment that we kind of got lucky from. And all four of those people I just mentioned, Hadi, Ollie, me, whatever, were immigrants. But David Wyden was also in that same class at Coastal Ventures. So immigrants and non-immigrants. But, I think that our parents, I don't know what yours did, would have been more thrilled if I was a doctor.
Oh, yeah.
or a lawyer. So I went to law school. I'd love those years back and all those things. But I guess when you talk to your parents, they had so little, you're like, a little bit more like, what do I have to lose by taking this risk?
Exactly. And, there's a point where you're like, I'm already going to be disappointing, by talking about tech. But really, if it works out, it's all upside because I have nothing to lose here. Because, my parents were like accountants and, that's kind of what they did until the day they retired. And for 30, 40 years, this is the one thing they did. Anything that was not that and could give me like career mobility was already an upside for them.
Yeah, but they didn't get it.
They wanted us to be stable.
Yeah.
We were like, we grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment with our parents telling us how lucky we were. So it's all upside from here.
Great. Yeah. I think my parents were like, okay, she's not a doctor. She's not a lawyer. She's not anything that's like what we'd call respectable. Okay. Computers. Oh man, that's disappointing. What are they going to do with computers? And my dad at some point is like, do they do like gaming stuff? Like what's the thing with this thing? Like why do you have to get this box? And I feel like they use like stuff like greeting card design. Like literally one day he was like, they design greeting cards on computers, don't they?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I guess.
Also, they really didn't understand, for example, when we quit Microsoft. They were like, Microsoft was such a known brand, Bill Gates. And they were like, why are you quitting Microsoft? You can retire in this place. But they didn't understand.
They were shocked. They were like, when I switch on my computer, I see the Microsoft logo. And you have to go quit that job? Like, what are you going to do?
You know what? Your parents didn't know that Microsoft 10 years later was going to launch ChatGPT with Bing. They were ahead of their time. They were like, maybe fast forward.
The other thing is no hobbies. I don't know if your parents had hobbies. My parents didn't have hobbies. All work. That was the hobby.
What is a hobby? Like the people like these days, and they're like, "What do you do to unwind?" I'm like, "What do you mean? Where is the time to unwind?"
Yeah, like, stamp collecting. But I think the fact that we had fun with computers is very suspicious. Okay, but so I want to kind of go from your background as kind of young, kind of a teenager, etc., to now you're a parent. We are parents, right? Like, how much do you think being a parent change the way you operate, or has it at all?
It certainly has, but I'm not doing a full-time sort of job with the intensity of Uber. But if I try to put myself back in that mindset and try to do both together, I'm like, whoa, it's hard. It's hard. It is hard to do both very well. Like, I feel like I'm a good dad now, a good husband because I have time. And I have control of my schedule, and the stakes of what I do, investing, advising, are just much different than if you're operating a company. But so it makes me want to travel less. Like those things that I was talking about, negotiation, when I just go take the initiative and go see someone. Yeah. Like maybe I'd probably do that a little less.
Right.
Because the trade-offs are, you have actual trade-offs. It's not just you and your wife or you and yourself.
Yeah.
Well, a friend of mine told me this before I became parent. And look, people are amazing, whether they choose to be parents or not, or whether they can be or not. They said, if you become a parent, often, you breed people emotionally slightly better, because when you come home, you're getting this huge range of emotions all the time. And sometimes, by the way, the negotiating tactics you might use with the VP, you have to use with your 2-year-old at the same time. And there's an empirical thing that I've seen. And again, people, a lot of people are amazing managers without ever being a parent, where it makes you a slightly different nuance and judgment of human emotionality. And of course, the time commitment part as well. Okay, I want to take a slightly different direction. So you're very interesting in your background, because a lot of folks in Silicon Valley have never worked in the government, have never really had like kind of a service component to what they are doing. And you have, that's number one. Second, it seems like now, our firm is doing American dynamism. There's a war going on in the Ukraine. There's a sense of patriotism. There's a sense of global instability back in the mix. Kind of maybe one place to start off here is, what did you learn from your time in the White House? You went to Afghanistan, you went to foreign countries. What did you learn that may not be obvious to our folks in tech who are listening?
one of the biggest lessons I learned when I did this, what was called a White House Fellowship. And the idea was to take people from non-government, like business, medicine, the military, healthcare, and like put them into government at the top level. So they attached you to a cabinet secretary. So the idea was like, you don't have to work your way up the bureaucracy. You could do this. And the idea was you go back to your industry and take that public service ethic with you and try to spread it amongst your peers. And so the things I learned there were just, there are competent bureaucrats in DC. They actually are. Like, there's some really good, loyal, smart, hardworking people. And so, and I'm much more skeptical of government, just my starting point. So that changed my point. It didn't make me say that Department of Motor Vehicles is competent. It made me just say that there are pockets of the government where there are extremely professional people, and thank God for that, right?
Yeah.
And sort of that changed. And the second thing is, they really, like, we're in a different world now where it used to be an honor to be a scientist at Los Alamos Labs or NASA.
Yeah.
It was a true honor. And we've made it such that those are not, it's much more interesting to be a scientist at Anduril or, pick your other company. So there's a flight of talent outside that's gone to industry. And therefore, it's our responsibility in industry to support the government. So when employees get mad at Google or Microsoft for not giving the government software or access to cloud, I'm like, that's just crazy town. Like, that for me is sort of, a really a red flag. If someone believes that they shouldn't be, this government that's doing, created the system that we're all benefiting from. And that we've taken the best talent in the world in business, not being able to sell them software, like sell them for money software is kind of insane to me.
Yeah. A lot of our listeners on this show, they are founders, aspiring founders. And a lot of them are going to look at this environment, this market, and some of them might have gotten laid off. Is this a good time to start a company? What do you think?
This AI sort of craze we're going through right now, like you and everyone else, I'm trying to think through, like, what are the business opportunities here?
Right.
Is this like, Tellme Networks was a speech recognition software company that ended up just being like, became Siri, it became sort of Alexa and all these things, but it became a component technology that in and of itself wasn't a business.
Right.
So what in the AI category is going to be a business you could build moats around and make real money? I don't know. I'm thinking about that. So if you're an entrepreneur thinking about that and you have an idea, I'd love to hear it because I don't know. But beyond that, I feel like we're still in, and I hate to sound like some pontificator on Twitter, but I don't know where the platform shift we're going through now. It feels like we've, like, the delivery, logistics stuff sort of all competed out.
Yeah.
There's a lot of the mobile era and apps competed out. Social networks have sort of like, yes, TikTok has innovated, but that's not 5 years old. So so if you're going to start a company, I hope it's a good idea because I think there's going to be more choosiness by investors on good ideas and by employees. So I'm going to take another risk after my stock just went down 90%. I'm going to be more careful about what I suggest and sign on to.
Oh man, absolutely. Okay. This has been amazing, and we could go on for hours and hours, but maybe kind of like wrap this all up. We like to ask this question to a lot of the folks who come on the show, which is, let's say we're looking back upon this decades in the future in some sentient AI up in the cloud, and you're looking back upon all of your career, right? What would you want your legacy to be? What would you want to say Emil Michael was X? What should be a Wikipedia headline?
I guess what I hope, and I feel like with medical science, we all have a shot at living until we're 100. If you're our age, so like we got, the arc of our career is just much longer than it was from the generations previous. We've got a lot more shots. We have a lot more shots at goal for that one Wikipedia headline.
Yeah,
right.
True.
I'd like to figure out. I'd like to have something. I'd like to have built something that's more important than Uber, because Uber is very important to the world. It's changed the way people live and play, live, work, play.
Yeah. Yep.
And the satisfaction you get out of building something that changes the world for the good. Right? You stop drunk driving. You got people where you want to go. It's easier to have jobs, to live in the suburbs. So many benefits of that. To build something as important like that in the next phase of my career would be something that I'm aiming at.
That is such a high bar, Emil.
It's a high bar. But what else? What else are we going to do? 40, 50 years ago.
I think one thing we learned from not just this episode, but everything is like, I would not bet against Emil. But Emil, you're such a masterclass in so many things. And I just want to say, just having gotten to Emil a little bit over the last couple of years, Emil is such a warm, amazing, generous human being. Maybe a tough negotiator, but just a wonderful, wonderful person.
Scary.
Maybe should the title be like Silicon Valley's scariest negotiator. Like, get some views that way. But Emil, you're such a treat. You're such a treat. This is amazing. Thank you so much for doing this with us.